How's it going? Adam Drake here, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about setting up and customizing the feel of your radio. So I have here the Futaba 10PX US Limited Edition radio, but these are kind of some tips that you could do with any radio. Now, everyone likes to do setup sheets and put out videos talking about car setup, but your radio is basically your driver's seat. So you want to make sure when the radio is in your two hands that everything is ergonomically as comfortable as it can be. Now, with the Futaba 10PX and the 10PX US Limited Edition, it comes with the drop-down. You also have the different wedges to adjust the angle of the wheel. You can adjust the trigger position. You can adjust spring tension for the trigger and also for the wheel. And there's not really a set setting that works for everyone. Some guys may drive or be a little bit nervous and shake, so they may like a little bit more tension on the wheel. I like both the wheel and trigger to be fairly soft, but to still have where you can feel center, so it has that crisp feel around center. But I'm just going to kind of go over and share some of the things that I do to make sure that my radio is as comfortable as it can be, especially in longer nitro mains. Again, you just want to make sure that your driver's seat fits your hand and your driving style well. So first we'll start with the drop down. So I do use the drop down, which drops the wheel down and also moves it slightly farther forward. I feel like that just puts my two hands in a position that is very comfortable for me. I don't really care for the wedge with the wheel slightly angled. I think it's just because I've used it this way for so long. But a lot of guys do like that wedge with a slightly angled wheel. As far as the trigger position goes, it really comes down to the size and length of your fingers. I don't fully like put my finger into the trigger. It's more just my fingertip. So I just have it positioned to where my finger is comfortable. I'm not really like reaching for the trigger, or also don't feel, crammed. But one thing that I do that I feel is really important is I do adjust kind of the shape and angle of the front side of the trigger. So Futaba makes a number of different aluminum triggers for different sizes of your finger. And if you can find one that fits perfect for your finger, that's great. But I like to kind of customize my trigger so that it has a little bit more bend and kind of holds my trigger in place. And I do that by using a soldering iron. You want to make sure, though, be really, really careful. You don't want the soldering iron to actually touch the plastic of the trigger. But basically, if this was the soldering iron tip, I would just hold it in as close to the front part of the trigger as possible without touching it. And it's actually almost the easiest to compress the trigger with your thumb, hold that soldering iron, being very careful not to touch your finger with the soldering iron or the trigger. If you hold the soldering iron there for a minute or two, it will soften that plastic, and then you can just apply a little bit of pressure or tension. And when you pull the soldering iron out, as this cools, the plastic will harden back up. It's a little bit of a process. You have to kind of let it cool, check and feel with your finger, and then possibly heat it up, make it a little bit tighter, or heat it back up if it's too tight and make it a little bit looser. But I like to have where the tip of my finger goes into the trigger and there's really not any deadband between throttle and brake. So if you're on throttle and you want to make a quick move to the brakes, you don't want your finger having this big gap, because it'll basically create a time delay between throttle and brake, and it also creates the possibility of your finger slipping out. So just something I like to do and customize to where, you know, again, my finger is basically my foot on the gas pedal and the brakes, and you want to make sure that you're able to control the throttle and brakes not only in a comfortable manner, but also where there's not a lot of deadband. As far as the grip goes, I use just a tennis wrap. I really like to use the tennis wrap just because especially if it's like a really hot day, your hand's a little bit sweaty, it just makes it to where the radio doesn't kind of like move or slide in your hand. I don't really modify or do anything with the foam. Over time, especially when racing nitro, the foam can get a little bit kind of hard and kind of beat up. It's why Futaba sells replacement foams, which I'm sure other manufacturers do as well, but just a really cool thing from Futaba. And other than that, the settings are pretty basic. I have gone over in other videos some of the settings that I use internally with the radio, as far as like the trigger mode, so 70-30, whether I use Expo or change the speed, so you can check other videos for that. But just wanted to do a quick video kind of on the ergonomics of the radio and making sure that your radio is comfortable in your hand, especially when racing longer mains, to make sure that you're comfortable and have total control of your truck or buggy.